Hello and welcome to this morning's online symposium hosted by Heart of London Business Alliance, being filmed live from the iconic Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square, which has hosted thousands of film premieres from as early as 1937. In a moment, I'll hand over to Jan Daly, arts editor of the Financial Times, and she will lead a discussion around the future of culture in London's West End, along with key leaders of some of the nation's most cherished cultural institutions. During this time, I would like to invite you and encourage everyone that has logged in to participate by submitting your questions, comments, ideas throughout the discussion. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ros Morgan. I'm the Chief Executive of Heart of London Business Alliance. We represent businesses and property owners from across London's West End, one of the most culturally rich areas in the world. Since the Theatre Royal opened on Drury Lane in 1663, the West End has become the world's most famous theatre destination, boasting over 40 theatres. Last year, over 32,000 people would go to see a show in the West End every single night. London's film industry is the third largest in the world. Its museums and galleries are unique to anywhere else in the world. Here in the Heart of London district, we are lucky to have 4 major fine art institutions on our doorstep, including the Royal Academy of Arts, the English National Opera, the National Gallery, and the National Portrait Gallery. Aren't we lucky? Across London's West End, there are hundreds of commercial galleries, 78 archive collections, 53 music venues, 45 jewellery design houses, and 11 dance venues, and the list goes on. In the years before COVID, culture was a major driver of inbound tourism to the UK and a major contributor to the UK's position at the top of the Soft Power 30 Index in 2018. There were 31.9 million overnight visitors in London in 2017, and a quarter of these came specifically for its cultural offer. Cultural tourists spent £7.3 billion a year in the capital, supporting at least 80,000 jobs. In short, London's cultural offer has become increasingly important to its wider economy, and its role in securing London as the leading world city to visitors to visit, to live, to work, and to invest. It is therefore, without doubt, that culture has a critical role to play in helping the nation out of crisis and into recovery. This spring, we commissioned Arup to assess how the arts and cultural sector is likely to fare between now and 2025 under various scenarios and its impact on the wider economy. Brace yourselves. Under the worst case scenario, where London experiences repeated lockdowns, there would be a catastrophic 97% decrease in GVA, which would amount to a total loss of £18.5 billion in GVA in the period from 2020 to 2024. Arup's analysis finds that even in a return to some kind of normality, the pandemic would result in a GVA 21% below what would have been generated if the pandemic had not occurred, which is a loss of £5.4 billion to the output of the West End arts and cultural sector. Now, as alarming as the report may be, it leaves us in no doubt about what is at stake. It won't surprise you that the report finds that London's arts and cultural sector requires immediate help and investment if it is to survive. The report makes it explicitly clear what the consequences are if government does not act now, not only to the sector, but to the wider UK economy. All that said, I would not be here if I thought that the London's cultural sector was a lost cause. Quite the opposite. Today's symposium is an occasion to reflect on the last few months, but it is also a chance to celebrate London and the West End's unique spirit and an opportunity to look at how we can harness the extraordinary creative potential we have right here to secure the future of this sector. At Heart of London Business Alliance, we are putting our money where our mouths are. Today, I am delighted to announce the launch and the publication of our cultural strategy, which encompasses our commitment to promote and invest in our area as the cultural heart of London. This strategy, of which I must thank our expert consultants, Future City, endeavours to connect businesses and cultural players within the Heart of London area to promote and invest in its unique history and character. With it, we capitalise on the heritage of the area's built environment and cultural infrastructure, establishing a cultural sustainability with one-of-a-kind experiences that unite businesses, residents, visitors, and investors. There is a lot to play for here, but I am confident that the good days will return. To get there, however, we must work together and ensure that everyone, businesses, visitors, and government, gives London's cultural sector the attention it deserves. Now, enough from me. Let's hear what the experts think. So it's over to you, Jan.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jan Daly. I'm the arts editor of the Financial Times, and I'm joined today by a fantastic panel. I will introduce them, starting at the end there. Kenny Wax, leading theatre producer with a string of hits to his name and president of the Society of London Theatres.
Good morning.
Stuart Murphy, chief executive of English National Opera. Axel Ruger, secretary and chief executive of the Royal Academy of Arts. And Sherry Dobbin, cultural strategist and partner at Future City. So a fantastic range of expertise and I think a huge source of ideas, some of which I hope will come up today. I'm going to first of all ask each of them to spend literally just 2 or 3 minutes talking about the particular challenges of their special areas of interest and expertise, and then we'll move on to the future and what we might be able to do about this challenging situation, to put it at its mildest. Kenny, would you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Jan. Well, since March and the start of the lockdown, theatre across London and the country has been decimated. I think I personally closed 12 productions around not only the UK, but actually abroad also. And the biggest problem that we really had is a workforce that is absolutely on their knees. Again, I'll talk UK-wide, 290,000 people work in the sector, in the theatre sector, in the arts, and many of those are self-employed and freelancers, and there has been, despite the terrific furlough scheme protecting some of the workforce, many of the freelancers have fallen through that particular gap. So they are, and Stuart will know this, musicians at the ENO literally have had no income for 6 months. So that's a huge problem. We know that the country, as Ros has just said, is bereft of its arts, and we know that the effect that that has on tourism, driving London's economy and around the country. The couple of things that we're desperate to have is an insurance-backed, a government-backed insurance scheme, without which we don't believe that 95% of the West End can reopen, because the commercial underwriters have been unable to support the industry due to the COVID risks. And that's a major problem, and clearly if that is sorted by the government, then we really need the lifting of social distancing in our auditoriums, because again, very, very few productions. As it happens, 1 or 2 of mine are the exceptions, which are small and middle scale shows can open, but literally 95% of the West End will stay closed. And to remount those big musicals, which are the drivers to the economy and the tourism industry, they won't open without this government-backed insurance scheme to help them mitigate huge losses, which would be apparent if there was a second lockdown. So, you know,
certainly a grim
difficult
picture.
times.
Yes, very, very difficult times. Certainly a grim picture, and I think we all sympathise hugely with the vast number of self-employed people who work in our sector. Stuart, opera and ENO in particular.
So, I mean, to echo what Kenny said, you know, it's been really tough. just so you know, we while I remember we have paid our musicians, it's just the freelance musicians haven't been paid. I don't want people to think ENO musicians haven't been paid for months. Yeah, I mean, you know, as Kenny says, we've used the government schemes. You know, the government's done its biggest investment in the arts ever. But, you know, in fairness, we've never had a pandemic before, so we've needed that from the government. That's been really helpful. Arts Council have given our public investment 6 months advance payments, so that's been really helpful. But without audiences coming through the door, that's 25% of our revenue. The biggest thing I'm worried about is transport. A third of our audience take a 1-hour train journey to come to us, and a third, and most of our audience is old. The average age of our audience is 59. So, you know, that's a massive part of our audience is just too nervous to use public transport. I think the other thing is socially distanced theatre just doesn't quite work. And while it might sound a kind of flowery thing to say, people spend money on big ticket items like the theatre or opera for the buzz and the atmosphere and things you can't quite put your finger on. People don't want to turn up to a party that feels half empty, and socially distanced theatre feels weird. So while we're still planning opera and classical music, we're going to do Mozart's Requiem at the start of November, it will be in a socially distanced space. And so that's troubling. You know, our revenue has kind of had its knees cut off. So as a company, we've tried to pivot into other areas. We've done drive-in opera, which you can chat about in a bit. But these are all experiments. You know, fundamentally, we need people back in theatres to perform grand opera and make the economics of grand opera work.
Thank you. So, Axel, you have reopened, and I believe all your exhibitions are open, with quite a few restructurings and new regulations, but they're going.
That's true. We are open again. We opened early in July, as soon as we were allowed to, together with the National Gallery. We were the first 2 big institutions in London to reopen. Because I also felt a strong obligation towards our neighborhood, actually, because, of course, you know, shops and restaurants were reopening at the same time. And I felt, well, we really need to see, you know, how we can open as quickly as possible. But, you know, the challenges are enormous. Thanks to social distancing, we can have occupancy of about 25%. You know, in historic buildings also, while we may have big rooms, you know, the bottlenecks are the sort of, you know, passageways and, you know, around the staircase and all of that. To establish one-way traffic through a building is not so easy. So, you know, there are enormous challenges, and we found also one of the big challenges was to instill confidence and exude also this sort of confidence, assure the audience that it will be a safe space to visit. Because the nervousness, both in terms of the audience, but also our own staff, which you must not underestimate whenever you think about reopening, the nervousness of the staff is considerable. And everyone has been somewhat also beaten into submission by these constant, you know, of course, this reporting. And, you know, last night I watched the news again. Of course, every single death is being reported on, which, of course, it is tragic. But, you know, the general sort of notion is as if we were living with a bubonic plague also. Yeah. So, you know, in that sense also, there is a lot of emotion and sentiment. And what worries me greatly is with now repeated lockdowns on the horizon that central London will just not get any traction for people to come back, because if you walk down Brixton High Street or in Camden or wherever, it's packed with people. There's zero social distancing, and that seems to be cool, but then people are too scared to come into central London when Piccadilly, Regent Street are probably the safest spaces in all of London, because there are really not that many people. We're nowhere near the, you know, footfall we were used to. And of course that translates also directly into who will come through the door. So while at the moment up to now we have been able to sell out to our 25% capacity, now with the summer exhibition opening delayed into the autumn, I'm wondering whether we will actually even fill that capacity. And I know from some of the other London galleries that they're not. So, you know, it is, and we don't get any government funding whatsoever, have nothing to fall back on. So, you know, it's a real challenge.
Quite something. Sherry, when you began working on your report, the report that Ros referred to, none of this was even on the horizon, was it?
No, we were kind of at a height, right? Everybody assumed that culture was synonymous with the center of the city, and one of the things that made it tick over. However, it wasn't formally recognized how. So I think one of the parts of the strategy that's quite important, and then also complementing the research that Arab has done, is to give legitimacy and to quantify, actually, the importance of the cultural scene within the greater economic, but also the sense of identity to the place. So yes, coming up with a structure first that's assuming a bit of success and how to capitalize on that success, and then having to understand whether that structure still works when you're in a challenging time. The good thing is that a lot of the bones are still exactly the same. It's the way we realize it that changes a bit. But you know, great placemaking and great cultural activity always is a variation of scale and opportunity. So it can flex, you know, with the amount of scale that we can take. But the thing that we discovered in the beginning of the process, and is even more important now, is that it takes a real collaboration. You know, it's got to be the civic community, the commercial community, the actual sense of the individuals as community and the consumers. They're all pulled together and adhered to, actually, through culture. And it's even more important than ever that we find these collaborations can take new forms, so we can come up with new economic models, new tourism approaches, new ways that we can work together, and also to understand how we can tap into government and regulation and allow things to happen more easily. So it couldn't be a better time, actually, to have something that pulls together people, gives a sense of governance, and opens up this opportunity. And one of the things that's so fabulous about a business improvement district is that they've been sitting at the center of all of these parties. Now you can really tap into them and enable them to reach each other and work together, because we can't go to just the old models. We're all going to have to invent new ones, and we're going to have to do it together.
So much there. New models, regulation, the difficulties of regulation. I'm sure we all have a lot to say to the government, and we'll get to that. But in the meantime, please, to our audience out there, please send me your questions, because they will turn up on this nice little iPad I've got here, and then I can put them to our panel as they come in. So let's start talking about we're here to talk about the future of culture, and let's start talking about real cultural value and what we can make of that. Ros gave us the most impressive set of figures about the economics of our sector, but I think there's something else that we can all, and Sherry's touched on this, we can all do, which is campaign on the basis of real cultural value, that what our cultural institutions give the nation, not just in terms of money and employment, but in all the other forms of richness, which are hugely needed at a time when everybody's frankly pretty depressed. Kenny, you're nodding away.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're talking about the West End, but the West End is a huge ecosystem. It's almost the very top of the tree. National Theatre, Royal Albert Hall, Royal Opera House, Coliseum, and the 45 West End theatres. But out there in the country, there's an incredible feeding ground, as I talked about, this ecosystem of regional theatres, repertory theatres, fringe theatres in London, new theatres opening up. Nick Heitner's The Bridge. Nika Burns is opening a theatre on Charing Cross Road in a year or two. I don't know if that's slightly behind now because of what's happened. The Boulevard, a fantastic little boutique theatre, opened just in Soho. And there's also touring, agricultural kind of touring theatre, as I talked about, reps and major #1 touring houses, and these all feed into this kind of tremendous lifeblood of our industry, which for many getting into the West End is the kind of pinnacle of that, really. So yeah, it continues to be a struggle, but we are all. The entire system is connected, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
I think also, you know, I worked in TV for 25 years. And, you know, lots of people cut their teeth in theatre and then go on to TV and film, you know, screen things in places like this. But also the arts are a place that reflects stories back to the nation and help the nation make sense of crises. They're also, you know, the Imagineers of the country. And so if people are having a tough time, they go to the theatre to escape or to have someone express the pain they're going through in a way they can't articulate themselves. You look at the wider industry around the theatre, the little kind of hyper-local area, as Alex was saying, you know, the restaurants, the clothes that people buy to go to the theatre, the transport. It's such a connected space that once one area falls, everything else follows in a terrible domino effect. Ros talked about the kind of soft power of the arts in Britain. You know, we're world leaders in the arts. And you can't say that about many things in Britain. And, you know, it takes Britain out to the nation at a time when politically a huge proportion of the population feel like they want to withdraw. You know, it's enormously powerful, like the BBC World Service. And so that's why we need support. As Alex says, you know, the theatres are one of the, and museums are one of the safest places you can go to. I went to Everyman Cinema earlier on this week to see an amazing film called Rocks, and the things we have in place in our theatre are, you know, are just the same level as in an Everyman. You know, masks, sanitizer, using emergency exits as entrances, staggered arrival times, getting people out of lobbies. It's all there. We just need confidence to come back and explain that people can still have their art fix and maintain their health.
I would even
confidence is obviously a big issue. Do you find you can when you're talking to government or making you know, sort of putting the case, is it easy or hard to put the cultural case as opposed to the economic case across?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. It's not now because of the pandemic. And I mean, this has been a struggle, and the instrumental case versus the artistic case, you know, has been made for decades already, and that constant tension. And but I think now, if you need any proof, then it was really given now during the pandemic, because of course one of the biggest tragedies is in a crisis that we could not fling open our doors and provide exactly the beauty, the imagination, the inspiration, the solace, you know, that we all in our arts organizations would offer to the public. It's no accident that the National Gallery was open during, you know, World War II and people flocked to it, even to see just one picture. So that role was taken away from us. So everything sort of, you know, went onto the internet, and all the cultural offerings exploded in the internet, but the uptake also exploded. So the need, the desire is really there. So I would even go as far as say we actually provided an essential service during the lockdown, you know, much like also, you know, the health service in a different way. So in that sense, but in conversation, you know, of course, it depends who you talk to. When you talk to the Ministry of Culture, it's easier to make that argument than when you talk to the Treasury. So we're certainly not there yet. And it has to do also partly with the fact that our sector in the sort of societal field of forces is often still seen as kind of a hobby and a sort of, you know, nice fringe thing to have for the decoration.
Or sometimes elitist.
And I would say that, you know, the crisis also shows that, you know, how essential it really is, and we just need to, you know, continue to convey that message.
Well, it's a strong one. Can you quantify this kind of cultural value? It must be a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's always trying to set what can be a standard metrics, and there's an investigation into when it's localized, when it's nationalized, when it's internationalized. And a lot of it, you can take the numbers from what you already know and then be able to put it forward. I think the other thing is, as you were saying, to view it as a legitimate sector and to also understand paying for it. So for example, the first things that started to happen were creatives immediately started to adjust. You know, things would go online. Major musicians were throwing concerts from their homes. Through protests, things were led from creative designers first. Artists were the ones who became the activists first. So we know and we go to the creative sector when we don't know what to do, which is an indication of value. So that means that one needs to start understanding an economy that goes with it and to fund it. So, you know, NT Live was great, and what BFI did for Culture in Quarantine, also excellent. We know that digital is going to have a place with analog, and they're going to be hybrids. We need to start paying for it. And we need to understand that it isn't just, for visibility that artists can live on. We need to understand that if we're going to them to help us get through these times, then it's easy to understand that we need to start providing for it and understanding how that sector is crucial. So if you're going to go to creatives to help keep your humanity alive, keep your businesses alive, keep people feeling confident, having a sense of wellness, then you need to understand that providing for that within your budget is also crucial. It's not something that you do later on. And I think, absence very often teaches us what is valuable and what is present. And the first thing we saw when all of the culture and the opportunity to connect and communicate was withdrawn, it was very, very blatant. And we didn't like that picture of our city. So now we know when you start to layer back in that picture what it takes to make it desirable, that's the evidence right there.
Yeah.
One of the potential benefits from this period, which probably sounds an odd thing to say when so many people have died or got seriously ill, is that arts institutions, I think, have had to hone down their narrative about their outreach and learning and participation. And previously, it seems to me, lots of arts organisations had learning and participation as an adjunct to the main event. Whereas when they couldn't do the main event physically, they focused on the role they play in communities or bringing, engaging young kids who don't feel Britain's for them, or, stepping into the gap left by social care. And so one of the things at ENO we've done is paired up with Imperial College Hospital and launched a thing called ENO Breathe, where we teach post-COVID sufferers how to sing lullabies, partly to calm their anxiety and partly teaching them how to breathe again. You think, actually, there's a genuine role there in kind of post-disease care. It's a pilot at the moment with about 30 people. If it works, I hope we can roll it out across the country. And, there are thousands of examples like this in the arts. And it's beholden on the professionals in the arts to get out there and better tell the narrative about the role they have outside the museum or theatre walls. So that's potentially one good thing that's come out of this, Jan.
Well, I love the idea of the creative, the startup mentality, perhaps. By the way, I went along to your drive-in opera last Sunday afternoon, which I absolutely loved.
In your Ferrari?
Well, if only I had one. But there was a very nice Ferrari on stage. I seem to remember the characters arrive by car as well. It's fantastic. It's at Alexandra Palace. So that's one example of something that has born of necessity, but really kind of good fun and interesting. So
I'll just give you the other flip side of that, because we were going to do a 12-venue drive-in for Six the Musical, which is one of my productions. We were working with the big concert promoters, Live Nation, and just about a week before rehearsals started, there started to be the murmurings of local spikes in Liverpool and Bolton, where we had venues, and Live Nation just felt that the risk was too high. So on one particular phone call, I had to put 60 people out of work. They were just about to start rehearsals, and say to them, so, for every one that does work, we'd sold tremendously well, and we had fans wanting to see the show. There is absolutely an appetite to come to the arts. I think we all know that. As you said, Alex, you're full despite your 25% capacity. And it's just very frustrating that for every one we try, I think there's one that can't happen. And in fact, you've talked as a subsidised organisation, Stuart, but the West End theatre producers don't have that sort of capital to do the sorts of outreach programmes that you've talked about, although the Society of London Theatre are very active in everything that they do and we do.
Well, and I think also it's important that we still also stick to what we do, which is make art and make work. I hugely respect, those programs, but we must watch out that we don't all of a sudden also get instrumentalized and say, okay, now you can also help with the healthcare and social work, and because actually we're not really trained for that. I mean, of course we do community work and all of that, but it still has to be closely connected to our art form and what we do, and that must not be sort of, kind of fallen by the wayside, and we're all now going over into social care. Because that's not what we were set up for, and what our raison d'être really is. And we still need to see how we derive well-being and sort of mental health and everything through the art form actually, and the expression of the art and emotions, and and as Stuart said, also help people express emotions if they may not be able to express it themselves.
Okay, this could be slightly controversial, but let's see what you all think. We all understand the importance of keeping well, staying safe, and everything else, but do you all feel that we're over-regulated? I know that it's very difficult because we keep getting different instructions, as Kenny's just said, particularly in local places. But are there too many regulations? Do you think that?
Well, I think one thing you brought up was, why didn't we start with the cultural institutions to open first? So, we go into the RA, we know we're not supposed to necessarily handle the artwork. So this is probably one of the safest places to let people in before shops and restaurants and such. And that actually, if we could start with the cultural sector where there are expectations, of how you behave inside the institutions, this is a better way to teach people respect and how one behaves. So as far as regulation, again, why the cultural sector and some of those institutions weren't the first ones to open, is a very, very good question. Why is it over-regulated for a museum than it is necessarily a retail shop? There needs to be some consistency there. And I think that's been one of the things that's been very, very difficult for the cultural sector, is that it's had an exponential number of regulations and oversight into how they're handling them versus several of the other sectors. And actually it could be the best way to teach people how to re-engage with one another.
Yeah.
There is a theme which I completely agree with that. But however, there is a theme I think in Britain which is we could have let we could have been like Sweden and not had lockdown and let people do their thing, because it's only the old or the vulnerable who are at risk, or with those with underlying health conditions. And it sits really uncomfortably with me that a civilized society should say, most of us will be fine, but there's a chunk of people who are going to be seriously ill. They should deal with it on their own. That's a kind of unspoken narrative which just feels really odd. I think a civilized society should look after the most vulnerable. I also think, if we didn't have regulation, you'll see what I'm seeing with my two sons at university, which is just crowds of kids all getting really ill. And it's fine when they're in a bubble, but the moment they go into a newsagent, so onto public transport, they infect people. And so if everyone was kind of sensible and rational and never got a bit drunk and relaxed, then we'd be fine. Yeah. I would quite like us to go to stage 5 pretty soon in the theatre world, and for us to be really careful and sensible, pre-warn people about the experience they're going to get, and then leave it up to people to see how they feel.
Yeah, but I think one of the big problems is that it's neither fish nor fowl.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we have this sort of perception of over-regulation. At the same time, it's not really enforced. Yeah. Going into lockdown, which was to me the most bizarre experience, when there was this kind of by government suggested, and then we were literally told, well, you should know whether you should close your institution or not. And it's like, well, and then this kind of moral pressure arose within society that we had an obligation towards the public to close in order to keep them safe. Whereas I think, no, you still can decide to come or not to come if you don't feel safe. That was number one. Number two, this whole issue around wearing face coverings, yes or no, then yes, in shops you should. I have not yet seen it enforced anywhere. In my supermarket I work in the West End, and no one at the door cares, whereas I was in Italy in the summer and everyone, and it was enforced. A friend of mine in Canada just told me, if you flout quarantine rules, you can get fined up to $750,000. And they really police it. They call you almost every day. People will drop by to see whether you're in. They trace your phone, which is a privacy issue. I understand that. But here, it's sort of, constantly rules are being announced, but they're never really enforced. You never know, is this now meant seriously or is it just a recommendation? What's a guideline? So, more clarity, and then also really sticking to it and say, okay, but this is now a rule and it really applies to everyone. Because clearly the voluntary, oh, you know, we will all somehow see, you know, what's good, is just not working.
I was going to say the ambiguity doesn't help. You're absolutely right, Alex. We were told very early on, singing, major no-no, brass and woodwind, big problem with the spittle. Actually, those scientific tests were done. It was decided that actually this wasn't a problem. I mean, I've heard that the theatre industry is more regulated than the nuclear industry, which is an extraordinary thing.
Right.
And take that as you will. Driving instructors are sitting next to pupils in their cars. People are sitting next to other customers on airlines. Other small spaces are full. And I think in the theatre industry, what we're trying to say to government is we are being very careful. We are providing tremendous work and information to DCMS, particularly Nika Burns, CEO of NIMAX, and Rebecca Kane-Burton, who's been very vocal on behalf of LW Theatres for Andrew Lloyd Webber. There is tremendous work going on. We've talked about contactless ticketing, we've talked about one-way systems, mask covering, temperature checks on the way in, testing for all companies backstage. You know, there are many precautions being done. I think more than anything, what we want is a date to open, because the big shows need 6 months. And we've just literally been told now, in the last week, that nothing's going to happen before March. But we can't be told in March, because that will mean the theatres open in September. And for London, on the heart of London, the major musicals waiting another year from now would be an absolute disaster.
So let's talk about what light there is at the end of this tunnel, or not even the end of the tunnel, what light there is seeping in now, what the way forward could be for the various sectors. Is there anything more that you feel you can be doing now, or are you waiting for regulations to be relaxed? Will you continue as you're doing, or have you any particular ideas that you'll be putting into play?
Well, no, I mean, we are determined also to, you know, to stick to program that we still, you know, try to realize exhibitions as much as we can, sometimes in a somewhat pared down version, but still that we do provide an offer. Because, you know, I mean, of course, and that also breaks my heart about the performing arts, that, you know, so little actually can be offered. You know, how much is taken up, you know, is also important, but really, you know, to have something to offer in the first place is really important. And then, you know, that we really have to work together in also, you know, this joined up way to instill confidence that it is, you know, safe and well to come in and to do, and that we all work together to ensure this. But then also everyone needs to pull in the same direction. It is not helpful if I enforce in my institution, which we did even before government said we needed to, face coverings, all of that. And the shop next door just doesn't give a shit because they find it inconvenient. And, you know, you walk in and there is no face coverings, there are no measures taken. In some restaurants and around us, the tables are still way too close together. And I do understand their problem, but it's not helping in, you know, instilling confidence and really being sort of on the same page, what distancing, what these measures really mean. You know, and I think that is, you know, talking about us coming together on this, you know, then we also should, you know, sort of handle the same kinds of, you know, guidelines and perform accordingly. Because only if you have a haphazard approach, the audience will not gather confidence. And my big concern is once we come out of this crisis and there's a vaccine and all of that, it will still probably take a year for the audience to gain enough confidence to trust all of this and to come back.
I mean, I think that there are definitely some positives, I think. As an industry, the arts industry is speaking to one another now in a way they didn't before the pandemic, and that's a good thing. Secondly, I think people are really thinking hard about an audience that comes in, and not just the work, but its spons. So we're facing an audience and listening to them a lot more as an industry, I would argue, than we didn't used to. I think thirdly, because of social distancing, the art is, if possible, and I know it's not the case with Alex's stuff, but forced out literally into the street. And so the conversations we've had with Holber have been on St. Martin's Lane, can we get cafes and restaurants out there? Can we even do work out there and perform in the street or in Trafalgar Square? I think the explosion of digital work has been brilliant and an absolute turning point. There's a kind of addendum to that, which is there's so much free work on digital now that, you know, we need to get value back into that because audiences are not prepared to pay for it in the same way. But, you know, let's not be churlish. Great art has gone for free to the 9 out of 10 people who have internet access in Britain. So, you know, so that's definitely a good thing. I think also as an institution, we've seen that if our average age was 67 3 years ago, is now 59, but still our core audience is nervous about coming in, we've got no choice but to alter who we're aiming at. We already do free tickets for under 18s. As a company, we're just focusing on who might come in. And we need to be really proactive about that. So, and I would say in terms of rep, as with Alex, we've a plan for the next year, but we're focusing just on the key things we really want to do and reimagining them to fit with a new business model. And I suppose I'm a bit impatient with arts organisations who say they need 90% capacity in order to stage their work. Well, try and change the work you're doing if you can, so you can sustain a lower capacity in the theatre. It's not always the case, obviously, but certainly for art, you know, for publicly funded organisations, it is. So there've been lots and lots of good things that will come out of this phase. I feel cautiously optimistic. We just need government permission to go to stage 5, and then let's get on with it, I would say.
Kenny.
We talked about the importance of customer confidence just now, and it was interesting that when the government's Eat Out to Help Out scheme was launched, the country flocked to its restaurants. They didn't need to be told it's safe. They were told there's a discount, go and enjoy.
Exactly.
And we enjoyed it. I think we probably all enjoyed it. And there's been murmurings and kind of jokes, Seat Out to Help Out for the theatre scheme. And the Society of London Theatre's got 2 tremendous schemes that it does annually. It does the Get Into London Theatre in January, and it does the Kids Week in throughout the month of August. And that sort of scheme to promote, but by the government to be able to say it is safe to go to theatres. I think people given a discount would probably come. It probably doesn't need a lot more than that, in all honesty. It's a kind of sanction to say you're fine, you're safe, go.
Yeah, it seems like that, but restaurants maybe it's a bit different, but in our organizations and our institutions, the expectations are higher. And I mean, we know this from, I can give you empirical, you know, data on this, that, you know, the nervousness and the importance of instilling confidence in the public is paramount. I've also thrown a lot more staff at our front of house operation. I mean, it feels like every visitor is almost taken by the hand, you know, and explained every step of the journey and everything, because, you know, that is, the nervousness is not to be underestimated.
And really, I mean, as far as positives, some of the things that have come out from the strategy and also to help it work together, you know, one, the sense of a cultural forum that's going to bring the businesses and the institutional leaders together to be able to share these desires. There's a website that's coming out before the end of the week that's called Art of London. That's going to help pull all of the information about visiting the area together in one place. That's going to help also push those messages out to all of the levels of the business to have this consistent behavior. And then what you mentioned, Stuart, about this idea of a gallery without walls is a principle that sits in the strategy, and it relates to Axel's you know, academy as well, which is that if we can't get as many people into the institutions, for the sake of the artists and the artists' work also, it needs to come out of the institutions. Now, not to just serve a purpose, but because the entire city needs to be, in a sense, the cultural institutions. So it is looking for those opportunities in which, you know, are still appropriate to the artists in the art form, but to be able to realize their work outside of those institutions, and also so that they'll go back in, you know, when those times happen. So there are ways that we've tried to address this in the strategy, and even a sort of formula to follow that helps people, a methodology to help create those collaborations. You know, and then Holba's really working to have that support to enable it. And I think it's crucial, like you say, the enabling of all of this and getting on consistent message and making people have an overall experience of place is crucial. Because in a way, that is the theater production. The second you leave your house to the second you come home is the experience. So how do we help to curate that?
Yeah. Well, I should turn to some of these many, many questions that I've got. And actually the themes we've been talking about, confidence, and perception of what, you know, what the offer is, and several people are asking about travel and saying there's a real nervousness about travel, and just what you were all saying about how it is necessary to get people in. And the thing about central London is that not so many of us actually live in the heart of London. We live we need to travel to the various places. So I think confidence is the huge message that's coming through today.
Can I just say, because the timing of the increased hours on the congestion charge was just really unfortunate. Because if anybody didn't want to get a tube or a train into London and thought, well, we could drive, to be then told that the congestion charge runs, I think, up to 10 o'clock at night now, instead of 6, which was a good time to park, 6:30 to go to the theatre, that was really disappointing.
And at weekends as well, which
and
is,
at weekends.
yes, which is really, really serious. So we actually only have got a few minutes left. So I'm going to take one of these questions, which is, if there is one thing you'd like to say to the government to help with the issues we've been talking about, what would it be? Keep it clean. Axel.
Oh God, now I have to start.
Yes. A practical, I think a practical message that we can
well, for me,
send out
I think I said it earlier, you know, real clarity on guidelines and on enforcement.
I would say thank you. It's been pretty amazing, your response. Look after freelancers quickly and let us open up so we can pull audiences back in.
Yes, you talked about the stage 5. Could you just in
There's 5 stages to open up theatres. We're at stage 4 at the moment.
Okay.
We just need to go to stage 5 and then we can collectively, with Holber, with one another, market to audiences that these are really, really safe environments.
The biggest fear on behalf of Society of London Theatre, the producers who work in the industry, the theatre owners, is the potential loss of the workforce. And the absolute best way to get that workforce back is to be putting on shows, and we can't put on shows without a government-backed insurance scheme.
So insurance is a very important message then. And at the moment, I believe it's the case that for many, many of the people self-employed in this sector, that there actually isn't any help because they fall through the net of all the different schemes. And that's incredibly important. One of our questioners says, well, could we have fewer freelancers? What needs to change in the industry to provide self-employed workers more security? Should there be as many freelancers in the future? Well, I mean, cultural organisations simply can't afford to provide actual full-time employment. I imagine that's the case.
Well, we have to be careful with that argument because it's also in the nature of our industry that people also go, you know, especially, I guess, speaking for performing arts, which I'm not part of, you know, that people, of course, also have to retain the flexibility to go into different you know, theatres, different institutions, work, you know, across the sector in different sort of permutations and so forth. So it's a bit of a red herring just to say, you know, no, we, you know, should employ them more and then, you know, it'll all be fine. It is the whole notion of creativity is really also, you know, predicated on freelancing and on, you know, flexibility.
On moving, yes. Sherry, what from your report? What message?
The one thing, I think there has to be flexibility in regulations, licensing, and enabling people to be able to pull culture out onto the street, as well as onto digital channels. So there has to be a swiftness with which, you know, local authorities can open up spaces, change business rates, make places available for people to actually be able to realize the work. And also, you know, as I said before, cultural institutions should be opening as early as possible, not treated as something later. It's a way to really instill confidence for people to come into areas.
Well, I think the, did you have one last?
I was just, with your alarm, I thought it must be bath time.
Yes, it's bath time, I'm sorry. It is bath time. I think we've had an amazing discussion, and I think that several things have come out, and one of them is that please tell everybody and feel it yourselves, you must have confidence in going back to the extraordinary cultural offerings that are there. It's absolutely worth it. So thank you hugely to my brilliant panel and all the work they're doing and everything that we all have to look forward to. And thank you all for listening.
So, what an incredibly informative and passionate discussion we've had today, and we've covered challenges, frustrations, there are a few I think, and actually some pragmatic solutions too. So that just leaves me to thank Jan Daly, Arts Editor of the Financial Times, and our panellists Axel, Stuart, Kenny and Sherry. Thank you. And of course the Odeon Leicester Square for hosting us this morning and for their continued support. The discussion today drives home the fact that we must formally recognise the value of arts and culture and the sector as a whole, and the critical role it plays in the prosperity of the West End, of London and the wider UK. And in the words of Axel, it's just not for decoration. As today's discussion has shown, the West End's heritage and cultural identity puts us in an enviable position. But we need to be nimble, proactive, and we need to forge new creative partnerships in order to come out of this crisis and keep London globally competitive through our cultural offer. At this time, the Heart of London's cultural strategy will bring together partnerships of artists, creatives, the UK's esteemed cultural institutions, authorities, businesses, and of course the wider community as well. Over the coming weeks and months, we will be inviting cultural institutions and businesses like the ones that we have today, and many of you watching and listening online, to join our cultural forum, to work with us and to take a collaborative approach to the promotion of culture in our great city. Our strategy includes a toolkit to make this process comprehensive and achievable. We will also be inviting our partners to collaborate with us as we launch our new cultural initiative. Sherry mentioned it, but we'll say it again, Art of London, that will take the key principles of our strategy and turn them into positive, consumer-focused activations, both digital and physical, as part of our efforts to drive the West End's recovery. Culture is the lifeblood of the West End, and in order to preserve it and secure the future of the area, we must do so in partnership. So, let me invite you, our audience listening, I was going to say at home, but you should be in your offices hopefully. What part will you play in the future of this great city? On behalf of Heart of London Business Alliance, Jan and our panellists, thank you for joining us.